Cybersecurity, steps you can take to protect yourself at work and at home. Before I introduce them, our speakers have asked that you take a moment to respond to 2 polling questions showing now on your screen. Question 1, the majority of security breaches take minutes, hours, or days to succeed. And question 2, average time to discover a security breach is measured in days, weeks, or months. Please select your answers and hit Submit to record your responses. These questions and others will be referred to later in the session. It looks like we have a different poll question up, so we're going to take that one down, and we'll get to these questions in a moment. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our esteemed presenters today. RIT alumna Kim VanGelder, Chief Information Officer and Senior Vice President at Kodak, and alumnus Jeff Wright, Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Allstate Insurance Company. 2 experts in cybersecurity who are here with us today to share some simple steps we can take to better ensure our cyber safety both at work and at home. I know I'm eager to learn what I should be doing. So Kim and Jeff, let's get started.
Thank you, Lisa, and hello, everyone. We're glad to be with you to discuss this topic of cybersecurity. For today's agenda, I'll start by giving some background, and then Jeff will take over to discuss specific types of threats and steps we can take to protect ourselves. Please feel free to submit questions along the way, and we've got a few more polling questions for you as well. By way of introduction, a Chief Information Officer is the person in charge of the information technology strategy and the computer systems required to run a company's business processes. So this would include manufacturing, ordering, shipping, billing, marketing, and customer service. This involves selecting which products to use, purchasing those products, and implementing and supporting the systems. In years past, these IT systems ran on mainframe computers in locked data centers owned by the company and were accessed by dumb terminals. Today, many companies use cloud computing, where your hardware and software is purchased as a service via the internet and provided by a third party such as Microsoft or Amazon or Google, and accessed by people from their smartphones. So as you can see, an entirely different situation from a security standpoint. And cybersecurity, which means the measures taken to protect a computer or computer system against unauthorized access or attack, is now a board of directors level issue. A guiding principle, according to the National Association of Corporate Directors, is to, quote, approach cybersecurity as an enterprise-wide risk management issue and not just an IT issue. It's the increasing cybersecurity risks that have led to the increasing prominence of the Chief Information Security Officer role, which Jeff will now describe for you. Jeff, over to you.
Great, yeah, thanks, and hopefully everyone can hear me okay. The Chief Information Security Officer role has really emerged recently, as Kim sort of mentioned, as a critical position within many large companies. And it has to do with understanding and managing cyber risk as a component, for instance, of a company's risk statement when they make their annual filings with the SEC. You know, investors and stakeholders want to know that a company has the capacity to identify and manage the risks associated with cyber attacks. But beyond technical aptitude in cybersecurity, a successful CISO, I think, is expected to be able to communicate effectively with executive leadership, and more frequently, again, going back to what Kim mentioned, with the board of directors and potentially and hopefully not media and shareholders. So it's the ability to communicate effectively and influence key decisions within a company, and even these days legislative matters that are important aspects of a CISO's role. From a reporting relationship perspective, it varies at virtually every company. Oftentimes a CISO reports to the CIO, but it's certainly not uncommon for the CISOs to report into top-level risk management positions, or even in some cases directly to the CEO. And it's probably worth pointing out, the federal government identified earlier this year, cybersecurity is and cyber attacks is one of the most challenging threats that faces us as a nation. And so they've appointed both a CIO as well as a cyber czar, and have taken steps recently to introduce both an executive order as well as legislation to help us improve our nation's security posture. But for a lot of us, it may feel like we're challenged with squaring off against well-funded criminal groups and nation-state actors. And hopefully this material will help you understand some of the facts behind what's going on in cyberspace, and how by taking some simple, relatively simple steps, you can better protect yourselves and your company.
Thanks, Jeff. So while a CIO is responsible for developing the overall IT strategy and plans and runs really the IT shop for the company, the CISO has the responsibility to evaluate those plans and make sure from a security standpoint that they're acceptable. And as Jeff mentioned, they focus an awful lot on employee education, which we'll certainly cover more in this session. So large corporations, as we discussed, tend to have both a CIO and a CISO. Smaller companies may just have a director of security in the IT organization. The structure for cybersecurity in the government does remain a topic of debate, and Jeff alluded to this. At this point, there's not a separate chief information security officer, so somebody with a budget and staff to do this work, but there is an advisor to the president on the National Security Council, that cyber czar that Jeff referenced. As recently as late September of this year, the chief security strategist for FireEye, which is a leading security software firm, recommended to the House Armed Services Committee that the president appoint a CISO to focus on intruders in the non-intelligence, non-defense networks. So those networks are covered by the Department of Defense. And to pay particular attention to cloud infrastructure, which we talked about earlier. I'm sure you've heard about the two major cybersecurity breaches last year of the U.S. government databases holding personnel records and security clearance files of about 22 million people, including federal employees and contractors, people who had undergone a government background check, and their friends and families. The Office of Personnel Management theft was separate from a breach a month earlier than that compromised the personnel data of over 4 million federal employees. Now, for over a decade, the federal government has had a chief information officer. Tony Scott's the third federal CIO, and he was named to that position in February of this year. Clearly, cybersecurity is a top priority of his. In fact, on June 12th of this year, the Office of Management and Budget launched what they call the Cybersecurity Sprint. And here's the case for action. Quote, the president has identified the cybersecurity threat as one of the most serious national security, public safety, and economic challenges we face as a nation. Ultimately, the cybersecurity challenge in federal government is not just a technology issue. It's an organizational, people, and performance issue requiring creative solutions to address emerging and increasingly sophisticated threats and new vulnerabilities introduced by rapidly changing technology. So they've got a plan that covers from 2015 to 2017, cross agencies to cover things like assessing and monitoring each agency's cybersecurity status, ensuring that users authenticate to IT resources and only have access to the resources they require for their jobs, and to reduce the risk of malicious software being introduced through email or compromised websites, which is a topic and a type of risk that we will talk about more in a few minutes. For our personal lives, we're not only the chief executive officer of our homes and the chief financial officer of our homes, but we are the CIO and the CISO as well. We decide how to use IT in our personal lives and how to ensure we're keeping ourselves and our families safe. It is astonishing to see what's happened in such a short period of time. The first email was sent in 1971, and the first website went live in 1991, so fairly recent events. You may have heard the terms digital native and digital immigrants. Digital natives are individuals who were born after the widespread adoption of digital technology, and digital immigrants are individuals who were born before the widespread adoption of those digital technologies. So an example from my life, for some, like my mom, all of this is overwhelming. She has never and will never use a computer. Once, to my shock, when she said she sent an email, my dad, who does use a computer, clarified that he printed out one of his emails, which my mom then sent in the U.S. mail with a stamp to her sister. I, on the other hand, immigrated. So in the 1980s, I was early in my IT career and interested in how to use these new personal computers in the business context. And my kids, now in their early 20s, are native. They grew up with this technology, so it's very natural to them to use it, and of course, to use social media. And who could have imagined the role that social media would take in so many people's lives? This year, based on data from We Are Social, out of the 7.2 billion people in the world, 3 billion, or 42%, access the internet. 2.1 billion, or 30%, are active on social media. At the other end of the spectrum, we now conduct our personal finances, our banking, on the internet. And all of this is not just done with PCs, but it's now done with mobile devices as well. So where is this all headed? You may have heard the term the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is the network of physical objects or things embedded with electronics, with software, sensors, network connectivity, which enables these objects to collect and to exchange data. The Internet of Things is enabled by cloud computing, which we discussed earlier, and networks of cheap data gathering sensors. The data gathered by the sensors is stored in the cloud and analyzed often in real time. Companies are looking to differentiate themselves with unique ways to use these capabilities. So the Internet of Things includes every device that's connected to the internet. So that everything then becomes smart. So you have smart thermostats, smart TVs, smart watches, smart phones, smart cars with telematics, smart roads that can sense the conditions and communicate to your car, smart parking that can tell you availability of parking spots, smart refrigerators, and the list goes on. Smart lighting can dim streets and turn them back on to full power when the movement of a car or person is detected. And companies are working on medical wearable devices, so a remote physician can do everything from diagnosing a condition to prescribing a treatment without ever actually seeing the patient. Companies announcing plans in the Internet of Things include the giants of Google and Apple and many more. And the number of Internet of Things devices is growing at a tremendous rate. However, as more of the devices in our lives, our homes, our cars, our wearables, become connected to the internet, and those devices are used to collect data, many people are worried about the risks, not just of personal data getting in the wrong hands, but also the increased number of access points for a breach. So this is clearly an area of focus for vendors in this space. Now, before we discuss how we can protect ourselves on the internet, it's useful to have some basic understanding of how the internet works. The internet is a decentralized, interconnected network based on standards. Think of it as a network of networks that needs to operate around the world as if it were one. A key point is that the internet was originally designed for research and for exchanging ideas, not for commerce. So some of the vulnerabilities in the underlying design of the internet are, one is the addressing or naming system, which allows hackers to send you to the wrong website, a lookalike website. Secondly, the way packets of data are routed across the internet is based on trust, that the directions are in fact authentic. Also, most information is sent unencrypted, so noting that we do encrypt connections for logging in and for purchasing, but most information goes unencrypted, and most of the traffic flows with few checks. The Internet Society is the international group that was formed in 1992, and they had the mission to promote the open development, evolution, and use of the internet for the benefit of all people throughout the world. One aspect of that work is facilitating the open development of standards and protocols and administration and the infrastructure of the internet. In their words, the internet works because open standards allow every network to connect to every other network. Also, this is what makes it possible for anyone to create content, offer services, and sell products without requiring permission from any central authority. So it levels the playing field for everyone, and it's the reason that we have the rich diversity of applications and services that many of us enjoy on the internet today. So who's in charge of the internet? Well, as the Internet Society would say, no one is, but everyone is, or we may look at that as everyone is, so no one is. But unlike things like the telephone network, which for years was highly regulated, and in many countries the government owned it, the global internet consists of hundreds of thousands of interconnected networks run by service providers, by companies, by universities, governments, and others. There's no real governance. So the internet design and the self-regulation certainly allowed for massive growth, but the internet was not designed with security in mind, so security issues also grew. As we think about the consequences of being interconnected, Certainly, it increases the benefits in terms of convenience and effectiveness. Think of how much more effective doctors and police officers can be with networks of information available to them. Think of the convenience that our home automation systems can provide us. But all of this interconnectedness also increases risk. It's more convenient to transfer money from your savings account to your checking account at Starbucks than standing in line at the bank, but it's also riskier. And this proliferation of new technologies has increased the attack surface and made protection more difficult, as we've discussed briefly with mobile, with cloud, and with the Internet of Things. So we need to stay informed, and if we're going to use technology for our convenience, we need to be educated on the risks and how to mitigate them. We'll pass the ball to Jeff in just a minute to talk about risks and what we can do about them. But first, Lisa, why don't we pause at this point to see if there are any questions?
I do have a question that gets posed to both of you, actually. You mentioned before about getting messages to your investors and stakeholders. So the question is, what are some of the questions you as cyber leaders get from your CEOs, investors, and stakeholders? Jeff, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I think I'll tell you, for instance, we had our shareholders meeting a couple of months ago, and I was pleasantly surprised, although part of me was shocked, when someone asked directly, you know, what are you doing to stay on top of all of these data breaches and threats? So, you know, I would say the questions vary. Our shareholders want to make sure that we're taking the steps necessary to protect their information. No one likes having to deal with their personal information, having been put online, having to enroll a new credit card and go through all of the effort to transfer over those payments. And so I think people are more cautious, hopefully, with how and where they use their personal information and their payment card information. And so they're asking questions of the companies that they trust this information with, just to make sure that they're thinking about these sorts of risks. You know, internally, you know, I think on the corporate side of things, it's been the questions I've observed over the last 2 years have been very much what you would expect, I think, of an organization coming up the learning curve rapidly. So they've evolved from how serious is this thing and will it go away, to understanding and appreciating that it's probably pretty serious and it's not going away. It's just going to get a lot worse in the future. So what are the sorts of things that we need to do? What does it mean to accept risk? And how do we create a facility for doing that? So the questions, I think, on the corporate side are getting much more sophisticated, as they should. And really what that's doing is causing, internally, stakeholders to, as I always say it, use a different lens, you know. What is the cybersecurity lens to this new business process or this new product or this new technology? How does this thing maybe cause us to have to think differently about the cyber risk that comes along with it? So those are all the right questions to be asking. The answers aren't all out there yet, and it has to do with developing a culture around risk tolerance and risk management. Kim, I don't know if you want to embellish on that at all.
I think that you hit it exactly right, and I think there's increasingly an understanding that there's the investment in technology that needs to be made, but an understanding that technology alone can't protect us, and a recognition of the need for educating people, because it's like living in a home with a sophisticated security system. If you open the door for the intruder, you're going to have an issue. So I think there's a greater appreciation of that among the questions that we receive as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Jeff, why don't we turn it back to you?
Sure. And if someone could manipulate the slides for me, I'd appreciate it. But you know, I'll pick up where Kim sort of left us. And you know, 10 or 15 years ago, were kind of lean times for us in information security. You know, we understood the risks, and those of us, I think, in technology understood the risks. but reading about a data breach or a cyber attack was limited to the security magazines or the trade publications that only us, propeller-head technology folks read. It was hardly an item on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or other popular media sources. And of course, now and in the last couple of years, the topic has grown to really, frankly, dominate the headlines of virtually every newspaper. I used to measure the amount of time or the amount of articles over the course of a year, and again, we'd be lucky if we got one article in a popular print material. And today it seems hard to make it through a week without being presented information about another large data breach or some report of planes dropping out of the sky or cars being launched into orbit because some hacker in Tunisia found a new vulnerability that they were able to exploit. So it's certainly the frequency of these reports has increased dramatically over the past several years. But as someone who's responsible for trying to manage the constantly changing threat landscape, it helps for me to understand, and I think you'll benefit as well, to understand the motivations behind the most common attackers or threat actors, as we refer to them as. And there's essentially four groups of people trying to ruin our internet party. But maybe to set some context first, I think it's important to understand there is in fact such a thing as a good hacker. And these are people that we typically refer to as ethical hackers. Ethical hackers are actually highly sought after individuals. These folks have extensive knowledge on both applications and the infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I'm referring to the servers and routers and other hardware that really make the internet work. But they're called upon to perform some very sophisticated testing. They essentially try to emulate or think like an attacker. They try to find vulnerabilities and break into our systems, primarily so we can take action before the less than ethical hackers find those vulnerabilities and we end up on the front page of one of the publications I mentioned a moment ago. But back to the real bad guys. There's essentially four different groups of people that we don't look forward to encountering on a daily basis. The first is hacktivists. Word will constantly underline that as a misspelling, but it's really a label that we've associated with a particular group, and these are the individuals associated with with a movement. They're activists, right? You might recall Act Up Wall Street or anonymous campaigns from several years ago. So in addition to the protests over unfair banking practices, the demonstrators took to the internet to conduct denial of service attacks against several large financial institutions and government offices. Before that, we were aware of other organizations. You'll probably be familiar with PETA or ACT UP. Before I was at Allstate, I worked at a pharmaceutical company, and ACT UP was the name of the activist organization. They actually conducted a denial of service attack against our corporate website during our annual shareholder meeting because they were unhappy with a recent and rather abrupt increase in the cost of one of our products. So hacktivism is kind of now the norm, given how effective and inexpensive it is to use the internet to voice your dissatisfaction over a variety of issues. What we hear more often about in the newspaper and on the TV, though, are state-sponsored organizations. And these are often much more sophisticated groups. And we don't have to go too far back in time here to see examples of the types of attacks that have been attributed to foreign governments attacking one another using computers instead of bullets. So Kim mentioned the OPM breach. Right after that was the State Department breach, or at least in close proximity. And likely several of the large health insurance companies that have been in the news lately are often attributed back to nation-state sponsored activity. It's interesting, though, I would point out that as much as we complain about being the victims of these sorts of attacks, the U.S. government actually engages in a fair amount of offensive action. So you all, I'm sure, are familiar with the Ed Snowden debacle, which exposed what was really essentially a very broad-based phone tapping scheme. You know, the intelligence agencies were collecting information on a lot of people and a lot of people's data that was traversing our networks. But it also led to the discovery or the disclosure of the government's role in essentially hacking sensitive communication facilities for foreign diplomats. And so it goes both ways, and recently there's been a lot of discussion between the current office, the current administration in China as to how do we begin to get our arms around this and maybe de-escalate things and establish some rules of the road, so to speak, before things get out of hand. The objective of nation-state attackers is multifaceted. They're interested in everything from economic espionage, so that would be stealing your proprietary data, company data, all the way on the other extreme to cyber warfare. So many of us probably have heard frequently about the power grid being at risk for a cyber attack. And so these sorts of things are almost always attributed to nation states. The third group that I have sort of categorized is organized crime. They also make headlines, although it's not often that these attacks get directly attributed back to organized crime rings. You probably haven't heard of the Russian business network. It's one of the more prominent organized crime outfits out there that operates quite a bit in cyberspace. So in the case of organized crime, their objective is often, I characterize it as personal financial gain. So this is where assets are being stolen, often resold for a profit. Clearly, many of the credit card breaches may well be attributed back to organized crime. We all know about the Target attack. Millions of credit card numbers were stolen. And entire markets were created online where you could actually purchase hundreds of credit card numbers at a time. Consequently, the relative value of credit card data fell off abruptly. So it used to be that you would buy making this up, an American Express gold card, and that card number would cost you somewhere in the neighborhood of $45 to $50. Today, valid credit card numbers can be purchased for as little as $10. And here's the thing, it actually comes, many of these organizations off.
Jeff, did we lose you? Sounds like we have lost connection with Jeff. So let me pause for a moment. Are you back?
I lost the airwaves there.
Okay.
But we're back.
Maybe you were cyber attacked.
Yeah. Sorry. Apple was under a cyber attack here. Anyway, I was saying, I don't want to go back too far, but in the Target attack, there were millions of credit card numbers that were stolen, and there were actually markets that were created online. You could buy hundreds of credit card numbers at a time, and so what we saw was the relative value of that credit card data fell off abruptly. You can buy platinum card numbers for as little as $10, and they offer a money-back guarantee. So if that card doesn't work, they'll refund you the money or they'll get you 2 new numbers. Interestingly, it's not uncommon to see nation states teaming up with organized crime, right? Those two threat actors teaming up to leverage specialized skill sets or access that one group may have and another may need. And that certainly presents some challenges in the world of defending, identifying your attackers and defending against them. And the fourth group, and that's really recently a more recent twist on things, are the cyber terrorists. So ISIS, as we all know, ISIS and their motivations, they have actually done a phenomenal job of making use of the internet to recruit, not just to recruit new members, but to actually embark upon some fairly not immensely sophisticated, but some fairly sophisticated attacks to further their agenda. And so this whole notion of cyber terrorists leveraging the internet is becoming more and more a reality as the days go on here. If we could flip to slide 8, please. I think it's also helpful to talk about the tools of the trade, or how some of these groups go about carrying out their work. And there's an important difference between what we read about happening, so a denial of service or a website defacement, and how these attacks are actually being carried out. I often get asked, how are these attacks happening? How do they get in? Do we need stronger controls on our web servers? Do we need more expensive or stronger firewalls, et cetera? Interestingly, the answer is that in better than 85% of the cases, the initial attack vector that these are carried out in is over email. All right, and so there are some simple things I think that we can do, and it has to do with just some basic awareness and using our technology differently that will add immense layers of protection. And we emphasize here at Allstate the end user awareness training, and just that simple transfer of knowledge, and the benefit that we reap from that is manifold. So beyond the common website defacements and the denial of services, there's some malware. We've probably all heard of viruses and malware. Command and control. I want to explain to you what we run into on the corporate side of things, what some of the banks often ran into with these denial of service attacks. Malware refers to malicious software. So it's software that someone may send you an email with a Word document or an Adobe document. In addition to giving you the information inside that document, it actually is capable of installing a very small amount of code on your system that then gives an attacker the ability to do a variety of things. They can see what you're typing, they can take control of your computer, they can copy information off of your hard drive. That's what we refer to as command and control. And it was with these massive denial of service attacks where this malicious software was being used to actually take your home computer and my home computer and tens of thousands of other home computers and cause them to load the web page of a particular financial institution. And being able to do that, to be able to create that sudden and abrupt amount of volume and direct it all at a particular website often overwhelms the web server's ability to keep up with it, and results in what we call a distributed denial of service attack. And again, those are brought on in part by malware, often at the fingertips of these hacktivists that are trying to make a point around unfair banking practices or some other item that they disagree with. Beyond that, you may have heard of viruses and crypto virus. Viruses have been around since the 80s with the I love you virus, and Fox News inevitably finds some very marketable name to label these things with. Earlier this year, it was the Heartbleed logo that took over the news waves for about a week or so. They were sure the internet was going to end with this particular bug that affected the security software that runs on a lot of web servers. But cryptoware is another very common piece of malware that we encounter. I was talking to my brother a couple of weeks ago, and he gets a call from Microsoft and says that they've seen his computer attacking their computer, and they need to come in and remotely clean his computer. He didn't do anything, luckily, but what they're doing is they're getting you to come visit a website where they can download, again, some more code onto your computer that encrypts all of your data so that they can turn around and then extort, money out of you to decrypt it, usually anywhere from $250 to $400. And I've spoken to folks that have done this, and they've paid the money, and they don't get their data back. So simple things like backing up your information on a regular basis can be very beneficial when you're faced with dealing with an encrypted hard drive. And the last one that I want to make note of is something called credential scraping. Credential scraping can happen in a variety of places, but I think it's important to bring it up here because it was credential scraping that brought about a lot of these massive credit card breaches earlier in the year. The Target one that we mentioned, Home Depot, was another one. Again, malicious software, in this case being deposited on point-of-sale devices, those devices where you scan your credit card. And they were scraping not necessarily credentials, but all of that information off the magnetic strip from the back of your card. It was scraping that and depositing on a command and control server somewhere out on the internet. So hopefully it's some of these potentially foreign terms maybe are starting to come together. You're seeing the connection between the threat actor and what their motivation and intents are, and how they then leverage tools to manipulate some of the technology that you and I probably use on a very frequent basis. But there's been a lot in the last two slides here, so I'll pause there and just see if there are any questions coming out of slides 7 and 8.
Thanks, Jeff. We have a question. Are we at greater risk of hacking from the U.S. persons or from foreign entities?
That's a great question. Ironically, if you look at where the majority of the attacks are coming from at your average organization, I won't name any specific organizations. In fact, there are websites out there that try to correlate and present this data for you. The most attacks are coming from the United States. So I think that's an interesting data point. You know, we certainly read in the news about certain countries, and it's not just China. It's Estonia, it's Latvia. There are a lot of companies outside of the U.S. that are perpetrating very damaging and very sophisticated attacks. But the majority of the attacks that folks see on a regular basis, on a routine basis, the biggest volume of those are coming from the United States, and they are often targeting U.S.-based interests.
Kim? Jeff, it's Kim. Shall we go over the results of the first two polling questions? And I know we had another one we were thinking of putting up at this point on phishing. Yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah, I may have given away one of the
No, I don't think you did.
Okay.
So on your screen now, you'll see the questions 1 and 2 and the results from the group. The majority of security breaches take minutes, hours, or days. What's the right answer, Jeff?
The majority of security breaches take minutes to perpetrate.
Our group thought correctly.
Yeah.
And the average time to discover a security breach is days, weeks, or months?
It is easily months, and in some cases it has been as long as 4 years for a company to realize that they've been compromised.
That's a significant amount of time, and it could probably do a lot of damage, I would suspect.
Yeah, and I would point out that in many cases it is someone outside the company, so it is some organization or some third party that is coming and knocking on your door, and it's not always or often the government, but someone presents information to you telling you that you've been compromised. So it's not that frequent that you're able to identify the breach internally, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Would you like to move to the next polling question or move on?
Let's I think pull up the next slide, and we can launch the next polling question here as well.
Great. So we'll have a question on the screen in just a moment. What % of people click on a phishing email within the first hour? We have 1 minute for everyone to submit their response and hit the button Submit. You're coming through. You want to continue from here, Jeff?
Yeah. So what you're looking at here, it's an interesting logo. I think it's one that the Department of Homeland Security has been using. I'll tell you, we shamelessly stole it, and we used it at Allstate as well. There's a couple of messages on here. Stop, drop, and roll. Look both ways before crossing, and stop, think, and connect. Hopefully everyone recognizes the first two. It's been something that's been ingrained into us since we were knee-high to a grasshopper, right? If you're on fire, stop, drop, and roll. If you're about to cross a busy intersection, look both ways. I'll add one other. For those of us that travel a lot, the TSA, I think, pipes in at least through O'Hare's hallways. If you see something, say something, right? You can pick any one of those things. We've landed on Stop, Think, Connect as a way to sort of drill this into people's heads. Kim mentioned earlier the technology that we use to combat cyber attacks is, in my mind, the tip of the iceberg. You can only have so many firewalls and so much encryption in all of this. At the end of the day, the bulk of our controls, what we rely on day in and day out, is often good decision making by our colleagues, our coworkers, our kids in the house that are keen to download virtually every game that they can get their hands on, or click on anything that's presented in front of them when they're working on the computer. So stop, think, and then connect is a mantra that we use around here. Slow down and stop. Think about what is being presented to you. It may be that you're contemplating sending some information out from your company, and that information may be proprietary or trade secret. It may have customer information, and it may have payment card information on it. You may be thinking you're getting an awesome deal on a hoverboard, and it can't possibly be this cheap. So, stop, think about the site that you're at, the information that you're about to send and how you're going to send it, and then connect the dots. We talked earlier about the different motivations and the different reasons why people are targeting our companies and our data. Who are they? What do they want? And how could they possibly benefit from what you're about to send out, or the link you're about to click on, or the action you're about to take? So again, it's a graphic, but I believe it's one that the Department of Homeland Security has advocated. Stop, drop, and roll hopefully works with, if you're running around on fire, we're hoping that folks will stop and think before connecting or moving on or taking that next action. So I just wanted to share that with you while we thought about our polling question there. So do we have the results back? Because our polling question kind of lines up to it.
We're putting them up now. So what % of people click on a phishing?
And let's see. Yeah, what did we?
And they came out largely at 50%, but pretty split then at 25% to 75%. And the correct answer is?
So often 75% of the breaches, if we want to refer to them that, are a result of human error. So that could be, I'll explain human error a little bit. Human error can range from a system administrator putting a bad configuration on a web server, or to something that we just finished talking about, right? Sending a file containing all of your customer data to a partner but doing it over email where it was insecure. And maybe you mistyped that email address and it landed with the wrong recipient. All of those sorts of things get chalked up to human error, and they account for over 75% of the breaches that we have to deal with.
And Jeff, maybe just one other point while this slide is up. That address that's on here, the stopthinkconnect.org, is a website that folks can go to learn more about this. As Jeff mentioned, it was a site put up by a coalition of different folks to try to help have a common message across public and private sectors and help people understand the risk. So we found it to be an excellent resource as well. We've pulled out some of the information for the next couple of slides from that material, but there's really a rich set of material that we wanted to make sure that we left you with that awareness so you can use it in an ongoing fashion and it's well kept up to date.
Yeah.
That's great,
so
Kim. If we can move to the next slide, I think there's some really great details in here for you to share.
Yeah, and so I don't want to take more time than we probably have to go through each of these, but I mentioned earlier, and Kim mentioned earlier in the opening, there are simple things that we can do to be better stewards of not just our customer or our corporate data, but also our home data, and those behaviors, those learned behaviors that we've created over decades of dealing with non-digital things. We can begin to correct those and adopt just with some simple steps, and they start at a very high level. Keep a clean machine. It kind of goes without saying now. Keep your software up to date. Microsoft, Apple. I'm trying to think of some of the big ones. Adobe. They all provide frequently security patches. And just patches to their systems in general. Those patches are designed to do two things. One is just to keep your system running smoothly, which I'm sure we all desire, but also to protect your system and your data from a lot of these attacks. And so just enabling those automatic updates, keeping your security software up to date can go an awful long way to protecting your data and your systems both at home and at work. Also, protecting devices that connect to the internet, and by that I mean we all have home routers now. We connect to Wi-Fi hotspots. Many of the devices that we use, your PCs and in some of the handheld devices also offer firewalls or the ability to secure those networks with passwords. All very simple things that are at your fingertips, things that you can do to secure your system and your network and prevent misuse of either your data or your systems. You can flip to the next slide. Protecting your personal information. I mentioned earlier one of the shareholders at a recent meeting just asked a very general question. We give, consider yourself an insurance company. The same holds true for a bank or a medical facility. We give an awful lot of our data to an awful lot of people, and an awful lot of organizations ask us for information online. And so if you stop and you think about it, is sharing that information entirely necessary? Do you have a strong account password on your bank website portal or on your benefits administration page? A lot of websites now give you an easy tool to gauge the strength of your password, red, yellow, or green, or 9 out of 10 or something like that. But consider just using capital and lowercase letters and mix in a number or a symbol makes your password infinitely more secure than poodle or your son or daughter's first name. The other one I'll point out here on this slide, and then maybe we'll move on to the next is, and you're not going to want to hear this, but using unique accounts and passwords. You don't have to go overboard with this. What I tell everybody that I work with and people that ask me about email and account security, I have a couple email addresses. I have my work email address, but I have a Hotmail address and I have a Gmail address. I give my Hotmail address out at the drop of a hat. If I have to register for a product or I have to enroll in something online, that's what I use my Hotmail account for. My Gmail account is what I use to correspond with individuals and with people that I want to maintain a relationship with. The reason you do that is because you know, and you've seen, that the minute you provide that email address to a third party, it gets sold about 10 times in the first 2 weeks. And before you know it, you're getting mail from organizations that want to sell you things that you didn't even know existed. So if you think about how you operate, you know, how you run your business or your life, there's an opportunity, I think, to not go overboard, but to be thoughtful about what information you share with whom. And where that information may end up a day, a week, or a month from now.
Jeff, may I pause here for a question from our participants? Joanne asks, do you recommend a password manager?
I do. I recommend them. I use one personally. I don't advocate for them, and we don't use them internally. Within the corporate setting, there are much more sophisticated techniques that we use to minimize the number of passwords that we ask our associates to remember, but I do use password managers. But I will tell you, there are passwords and accounts that I do not put in there.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
So we have one more slide for you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Yep.
One more slide, and then we're getting ready to close. Yeah.
So last slide. Just some simple thoughts here. Connect with care, right? When in doubt, throw it out. You know, links. A quick example I've used in the past. My in-laws. I get them all set up with their computer. And then the next time I was over there, some virus, and dozens of viruses usually. It wasn't just one or two, but I'd end up having to be the computer fix-it guy on nearly an every other week basis. And it wasn't until I was there for one of the holidays and I noticed my mother-in-law going through her mail, her postal mail. And she's the type of person that opens every single envelope from every credit card company that's out there, reads it, complains about getting the junk mail, and then tears it up and throws it away. And she carries that behavior over, and many of us do, into our digital experience. And so, unfortunately, opening email and clicking on the links that say click here to unsubscribe, or exploring the web links or the attachments that are in there are often, go back to better than 85% of these attacks originate through email. These attachments, these links are often malicious. They are how the bad guys, if we refer to them as that, get that software onto our computers that then give them the ability to do command and control. So when in doubt, throw it out. If you don't recognize the individual, if you're not interested in the product, stop right there and throw it out. Get savvy about Wi-Fi hotspots. I mentioned just a minute ago. Just be thoughtful about the type of business that you conduct on open Wi-Fi networks. It may be that they're being monitored, or it could be that there are people on that same network that are taking advantage of people that connect to the Wi-Fi hotspot to try to intercept that traffic. And then protect your dollars, right? Think about where you're using your online payments. Make sure that you're looking for the HTTPS. The S is for security or for secure socket layer. If it doesn't have the S, it's not secure. Don't put your payment card in there. Don't put your debit card in there if it's just the conventional HTTP site. And a lot of our web browsers have gotten a lot better recently. They'll turn a site green if it is secure, they'll turn it red and pop up big warnings if it's not secure, and they see that you're being asked for your payment card information. So though technology is catching up, like I said, but it really comes down to our individual ability to understand and be aware of what's going on around us. And so from here, I think I'll turn it back to Kim to take us home.
Yeah, thank you. And just a note relative to RIT's role, because we as alums can be proud of the role that RIT takes as it relates to cybersecurity. Because not only is our Golisano College home to the nation's first undergraduate programs in software engineering and information technology, but the Golisano College was also the first in the nation to establish a Department of Computing Security in 2012. So that is a very unique and impressive accomplishment. We've placed top 3 in the National Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition for the past 3 years as well. And during this year's 2-day competition, 10 of the best student teams in the nation worked to fend off cyber attacks from a team of industry professionals. And the challenge this year was for the student teams to defend against an attack to shut down the U.S. electric grid, which is the scenario we referenced earlier in this discussion. And so students were hired as a replacement IT team to understand what the threat was, could they detect the threat, respond to it, maintain the services such as email and web servers and file servers for their company. And they had to manage the devices at the same time that ran the grid. So our team finishing in 3rd place on that is really an impressive accomplishment. And in RIT, we also participate in the National Science Foundation's Cyber Corps Scholarships for Service, because there is a national shortage of computer security professionals, and both industry and the government's facing this. So this program is designed to increase the number of people who work for the federal government in these critical IT security roles, and the program provides scholarships to students funded through grants from the NSF, and the students then work after graduation for the government for the number of years they received the scholarship. I was on campus last month and heard from one of the Cyber Corps scholarship recipients, and he was talking about the work he was doing on drone security, analyzing vulnerabilities on open source projects, really some impressive work from some impressive students. So with that, we'd like to, Lisa, turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, Kim. So we've expended all of our time for Q&A, but we will send all remaining questions directly to our presenters for some comments. Additional questions can be emailed to ritalum@rit.edu or tweeted to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #MeRITWebinars, and we will direct your questions to our experts. Note that all participants will receive an email from us in the next few days with a link to today's webinar recording. Many thanks to Kim and Jeff for being our distinguished speakers today, and thank you to all our listeners for joining us for today's webinar. Our next webinar is on November 11th on taxation and charitable giving. With 2015 rapidly coming to a close, now is the time to think about your year-end charitable giving and the various implications on your 2015 tax preparation. Please check your email inbox for an invitation to this next MeRIT webinar event. Thank you again all for joining us today. Please exit this webinar by simply closing your WebEx window, and please do let us know what you've thought of the webinar through a brief survey, which will pop up when you exit. And have a great day.